Hi, it's Dwyer. It is July 27th, 2025. I mentioned the date because this might be the start of an era, right? This is the morning after Xander Zayas beat Garcia Perez, right? He now is a WBO 154-pound champion. Let's talk about it, but first remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, before I start, let me just point out that I'm surprised by the results of a poll that I have posted in the comment section for my YouTube account, right, on exactly just how good is Xander Usyk. Now, to my surprise, and you never know how these things land, right? My site's not the biggest. There's several boxing sites that have hundreds more viewers than mine. When I posted this poll, I thought, okay, maybe 40, 50 people would comment on it. So far, 373 of you have commented on it, and to my surprise, 60% of you, more than half of you, believe that Xander Usyk is the best heavyweight of at least the last 20 years. Right now, I'm not going to argue with the public. Let me just say this, right? Couple of things. First, if the general public, and my poll's unscientific, people might be voting more than once, who knows the lay of the land? But just understand that if this poll reflects the larger public opinion, then this could be a Roy Jones moment for Xander Usyk, right? In my opinion, had Jones left the sport after winning the heavyweight title, we would be talking about him the way people talk about Ray Robinson. He would be in every conversation about the best ever, right? The more you look back on him, you would think, wow, this is preposterous. A guy who is one of the best in the sport, if not the best in the sport, pound for pound at the time, jumping from not cruiser but light heavyweight to then beat John Ruiz, a guy who had given Evander Holyfield all he could handle. Right? Jones would be an urban legend. Let me also talk about the money. And Lord knows, I know that Jones made a lot of money after winning the heavyweight title, even in losing efforts, right? He got paid for the Tarver fights. He got paid for the Glencoff Johnson fight. He got paid for the Joe Calzaghe fight. But let me just say this. That's the most expensive money Jones ever made in his life. Had Jones just walked away from the sport, he's a trainer now, right? One wonders the premium Jones would have gotten for speeches, for appearances. You don't think Ray Leonard's actually paying for the tickets he gets for the biggest fights out there, right? Promoters want these dignitaries, quite frankly, attending their fights and stuff like that. One could imagine how much more market value Jones would have without all the punishment he suffered after he lost the heavyweight title. I saw Jones in a fight against Denis Lebedev. Google the end of that fight. Folks, Jones got dropped so hard that I feared Jones would never make it all the way back. Right? I thought this was going to be an Adonis Stevenson situation. Fortunately, Jones woke up, they gave him smelling salts, right? And Jones was able to continue on with his life. If Usyk walks away right now, the undisputed heavyweight champion, with 50%, 60% of the public believing that he is the absolute best heavyweight of the Fury era, the Joshua era, the Wilder era, right? There are comments, by the way, to the poll, and many people just flatly said he's the best of the post-Lennox Lewis era. Right? Well, understand, Lewis lost a couple of fights. This guy hasn't. Understand, Lewis was a undisputed heavyweight champion. This guy's undisputed in more than one weight class. Right? I would argue that Usyk would be an urban legend, like Roy Jones could have been. Right? People in boxing, we forget the last few fights a fighter has. My dad was a Joe Louis fan. We certainly weren't going to talk about Marciano Lewis, right? We weren't going to talk about Ezra Charles Joe Louis, right? I understand, Ray Leonard, people aren't going to mention the terrible Terry Norris fight, the Hector Camacho fight, right? In boxing, there's a culture where we expect greats to deteriorate somewhat, right? But let me just say, in this social media era, in this era where we all have films of fights, if you believe, and there's certainly Hall of Famers from the heavyweight division over the last 20 years, including, in my opinion, Fury and Wilder, right? I would put Joshua in the Hall of Fame as well. Right? But if you believe a guy is the best over the last 20 years, then in my opinion, it's not worth the risk for Usyk to continue fighting. Joe Parker would be major competition in the moment. Kabayel would be major competition in the moment. Right? But neither Parker nor Kabayel has the resume that Usyk has. And we all understand that there's always going to be credible opposition out there. If Usyk walked away here, there's a certain symmetry. Right? He beat Joshua twice. He beat Fury twice. He beat Dubois twice. All three of those men, at one time or another, held a share of the heavyweight title. Right? He can then walk off into the sunset. He's 38 years old. The thought process would be, look, sooner or later I'm going to have to retire. My last fight was for the undisputed heavyweight championship. Right? Understand, too, just like has already happened to Usyk, right? When you're trying to please 4 sanctioning bodies, some sanctioning body is going to threaten to strip you if you don't fight their mandatory, and that's the way it should be. Undisputed should be a very difficult status to attain. The sanctioning body should have some reverence for their own rankings. Right? Just understand, if he continues fighting, even if he fights the people you want, right? The Parker, the Kabayel, whoever else, Moses Atama, for me, Lawrence Okoli, who is a top-rated contender, by the way, for one of these sanctioning bodies. It might not be for the undisputed championship. He might get stripped. Right? So let's just think this through. Let me add a second caveat to it. I'm a bit puzzled You tell me why I shouldn't be in the comment section of this video. How you could have as close a fight as you had in the first Fury Usyk fight. And Fury at that stage had already been dropped by Francis Ngannou. Didn't quite have the legs that he had when he fought Vladimir Klitschko. Right? Let's just say if you believe Fury is diminished a little bit past his peak. When he fights Usyk, that first fight, we all know the 9th round of that first fight changed history. But I would argue that Fury, by the time we got to round 7, Fury had already won at least 4 rounds. Right? By the start of round 7. Tell us your scorecard in the comment section of this YouTube video. The 9th round was awfully late in a 12-round fight. Right? I thought that fight easily could have been scored for Tyson Fury. I believe the Fury who fights Usyk on that night loses to the Fury who beat Vladimir Klitschko. Right? Loses to the Fury who, in the lead-up to the Klitschko fight, is openly ambidextrous in fights against world-class competition and is destroying world-class competition. If you believe that Tyson Fury, who lost a split decision, folks, that's how close it was, a split decision to Xander Usyk in the first fight, was, put a percentage on it, 90% of prime Tyson Fury, 85% of prime Tyson Fury, 80% of prime Tyson Fury. Are you sure that Fury at his peak would lose to Usyk? Right? Let's remember, more than half of you believe Usyk's the best of the last 20 years. Right? In the last 20 years, you had a heavyweight, Tyson Fury, literally reach a point where he could put both hands behind his back in a fight against a guy who had the belt for years. Right? Granted, there are breaks. Granted, Vladimir Klitschko had lost to Layman Brewster. He had lost to Ross Purity. Granted. But there's a moment in that Fury-Klitschko fight where Fury puts his hands behind his back and Vladimir Klitschko could not hit him. Understand, too, the commentary is legendary because the commentators were so surprised that Klitschko, an underdog fighting in Germany, was dismantling Klitschko, that the entire fight, the first 10 rounds at least, the commentators are wondering openly what's wrong with Vladimir Klitschko. Are you sure that Fury loses to this Usyk? Tell us about it in the comment section of this YouTube video. Now let me say this. Xander Zayas. Folks, I know a lot of fights happened yesterday. This was the fight for me. Right? We talk about freak athletes. I don't consider Canelo to be a freak athlete. I don't consider Terence Crawford to be a freak athlete. The secret to Manny Pacquiao, the secret to Floyd Mayweather, is that they're freak athletes. And by that I mean the hand speed is faster than whoever they're facing. Right? Later in Floyd's career, there were some fights where the opponent arguably had more hand speed. Right? Zab Judah, one of the most important fights in Floyd's career, Judah not only has the hand speed advantage on Floyd, but Judah knocks him down. The ref misses it. Go back and revisit that fight. I believe the knockdown's in like the 3rd round. Floyd's glove hits the canvas off a punch. right? But just understand, prime Mayweather, just like Fury, to me, dipped a little bit, right? Fury lived a hard life, right? There are mental health concerns, there are weight concerns there, right? Just like Fury dipped a little bit from his top. Let's remember, too, years pass, years, plural, between his victory over Vladimir Klitschko and his fight against Deontay Wilder, right? Years pass. The secret to Mayweather is Mayweather, and that's the person I want to focus on here because, believe it or not, that's the analogy to Xander Zayas, right? A guy who's about to turn 23 years old, right? Floyd, by the way, was very young when he picked up his first professional title, right? Mayweather was a freak athlete who was a technician. Mayweather also was a person who, unlike another freak athlete, Ray Leonard, right? Mayweather was a guy who put limits on himself. He was a pot shotter. He wasn't going to be in the pocket that long. I need for people to understand that Mayweather's left hook was among the best in boxing. Mayweather could knock down anyone with that left hook. It would be a mistake to say that Mayweather didn't have power. Mayweather had a lot of power. You see it in the Diego Corrales fight. Important fight between two unbeatens. Right? But Mayweather made a decision with all the hand speed, with all the foot speed, with one of boxing's best punches. Mayweather made a decision that he was not going to linger in the pocket. Mayweather also made a decision to prioritize defense. So, Floyd fights featured Mayweather, another stable, starting slow, right? Because Mayweather had a system. He needed to read you in the early rounds, right? First 3 rounds of a fight. He needed to read you. Just like Bernard Hopkins needed to read you early in a fight. Then Mayweather, once he cracked your code, usually around, let's say, the 3rd round, 4th round, it was game over. You weren't going to find him in the ring. Right? He would visit the pocket. Then he would leave the pocket. Mayweather figured out that he could lead with power shots. Right? So Mayweather would, whatever was happening in the fight, Mayweather was coming in, he had a script. We'll call it an algorithm. Where he would come in, he would lead with power shots, he would not press the issue. You couldn't take him out. Right? You couldn't find him. He moved too well. Hall of Fame level opposition never gets started against him. We remember Manny Pacquiao fighting Juan Manuel Marquez 4 times. We don't remember Juan Manuel Marquez ever fighting Floyd Mayweather, and he did. The fight's too lopsided to remember. Right? Mayweather comes in, Mayweather's on the move constantly in that fight. Mayweather comes in, roughs up Marquez, backs away. Marquez never gets going. The gold standard, one of them, Mayweather has a few gold standard fights, but one of the stunning gold standard fights is his fight against Arturo Gatti. Right? Understand, Gotti's in the Hall of Fame. Gatti at the time was known as Blood and Guts. Right? You know, he was a guy who, you know, the Mickey Ward fights, wow, you thought there might be an autopsy necessary after those fights, right? You know, Gotti was the height of, tough guy fighter. Didn't have the tools, the hand speed of a Mayweather. Mayweather isn't even, in my opinion, one man's opinion, he isn't even trying to hurt Gotti. He's just running his algorithm. And it's so devastating that watching the fight is difficult for me. Right? That's one of those fights where you want the referee to stop the fight. You want Gotti's corner to throw in the towel. It's a mismatch. It's obvious. Mayweather looks like he's from another planet. Gotti can't find Mayweather. Mayweather's hooks to the body are such that, as I say this, my ribs are hurting. Folks, Xander Zayas is that same type of boxer. Now, I'm hesitant to put anybody, any contemporary certainly, on Mayweather's level. Right? I really believe Mayweather is a cut above. Right? But let's just say Zayas, like Mayweather, is a freak athlete. Right? Zayas, like Mayweather, hits harder than you think. He has the offensive firepower. But like Mayweather, even though Zayas could be a combination puncher, this is the guy who's judicious. This is the guy who doesn't want to open up. He has the hand speed. He doesn't want to open up. So what happens is he comes in, he lands a couple of hard counters, and then he backs away. This is the opposite of Ray Leonard, right? Understand, it got Ray in trouble against Roberto Duran, right? It got Ray in trouble against Thomas Hearns in the rematch. In fact, it gets Ray in trouble in the first fight. We forget Ray's swollen eye in that first Hearns fight. Understand, the Mayweathers and the Zayases don't want to be in that position. Now, it matters here because there is a calibration period, right? We forget how slow Mayweather started in fights. Zayas starts slow as well. But there's a great moment. ESPN stumbled on one of the best interviews I've seen of a young fighter. Right? There was a great moment in that ESPN telecast. I understand it was Top Rank's final show on ESPN. But Mark Kriegel is talking to Xander Zayas, and you wonder what the kid thinks of himself. Does the guy know that he's special? Right? How does the guy see himself against a tough opponent who beat Charles Conwell, one of the biggest talents at 154, a loaded division? And Zayas doesn't give what I call an A-Rod interview. Right? Some politically correct interview where he says all the right things to let you know that he respects his opponent and to let you know that he's, corporate sponsor friendly. He doesn't give a Sugar Hill interview. Same type thing, right? A-Rod, one of the best players I've ever seen in the big leagues. I can't watch an A-Rod interview. I saw a Sugar Hill Stewart interview. They asked him who he thought the top 5 heavyweights were. His response was that he doesn't rank the heavyweights. He doesn't think that way. Right? They asked him, who do you want to see your fighter, Tyson Fury, fight next? The answer was, whoever Tyson wants to fight. right? I think Sugar Hill's an excellent trainer. I don't want to see another Sugar Hill interview. So here was Mark Kriegel in front of a guy who is a very decorated amateur, right? Now he's an unbeaten pro. He's not quite 23. He's about to fight in Madison Square Garden, the theater at Madison Square Garden, yet again, right? And he is unbeaten. He's heavily favored. He's going off at better than a minus 400 against an opponent who's much more experienced than him. And Kriegel turns to Xander Zayas and says, what do you do better than this opponent who's coming off a career best win over a previously unbeaten Charles Conwell? And Xander Zayas, who has not yet gotten the memo that he's expected to sound like Alexander Usyk, right? Let's say an older guy who has had a spectacular career, right? The kind of career that has many of you believing he's the best heavyweight of the last 2 decades, right? Right? Xander doesn't get the memo on how he's supposed to behave in public. So this guy who's been in the public light for years, who's from a boxing hotbed, not just Puerto Rico, but Florida, right? Xander Zayas gives his best answer. He tells Kriegel everything. Then he goes further. You need to listen to the further. He talks about the hole in his upcoming opponent's game, talks about his hand speed, how he's faster. Basically is sounding like Devin Haney. But there is an air here of sincerity, right? Xander Zayas knows he has more foot speed than you. Xander Zayas knows he has more hand speed than you. He has more power than you, right? But understand, the he drops his hands line shows you that Xander Zayas is really a defense-first fighter. Right, folks? He's far beyond his years. This is a guy who doesn't even take the risk inside. Right? He started looking like Bernard Hopkins, started looking like Ali. He started holding his opponent. He didn't want to trade with, Garcia Perez on the inside. Think about that. Right? He's holding to the point where the referee in a fight that Zayas is winning by several rounds. Look at the scorecards. The referee starts warning the freak athlete who's ahead in the fight of holding. In the 9th round, there's a sequence that's stunning. You don't see this that often. The freak athlete lands a picture-perfect right hand to the side of his opponent's head in a fight he's dominating. Perez staggers, right? Drops his hands, staggers. He's over by the ropes. He's just been hit with a shot. What does Zayas do, folks? Zayas is following his algorithm, right? Just like Tom Brady in the pocket knows, I have to get rid of this football in 3 seconds, right? Whatever I'm seeing, I need to either hit a receiver or throw the ball away. I can't take the sack. Xander knows he's ahead. He's not going to linger in the pocket even as the other guy is staggering. There's a moment in this fight where Zayas goes to his corner, right? You need to view Zayas as foot speed and defense first. And that's important in this division. You also need to view him as a guy a reigning champion who's 6'6", a guy who's taller, think about this, than Xander Usyk, right? A 6'6" champion at 154 offered to defend his belt against Xander Zayas, but wanted a rehydration clause. This would have been Zayas' first shot at a title. And the guy he was talking with was Sebastian Fundora. This is a guy who beat Erickson Lubin, who's in line to fight Murtazaliev, another champion, as Murtazaliev's next defense. This is a guy who beat, at the time, Tim Tszyu once. In other words, this is one of the standard bearers of the 154 division. Right? This is the champ who has defended his title. And he offered to fight Xander Zayas, who had never fought for a world title. But he wanted, the 6'6" champ, wanted a rehydration clause in the contract. Now you would have thought, Xander Zayas would say, hell yeah, give me a rehydration clause. I don't want some 6'6" guy coming in after having gained 20 extra pounds. Right? Who's more likely to gain weight? I'd say it's the 6'6" guy who somehow weighs 154. Right? So here's the 6'6" champion offering me a rehydration clause. I'd say, hey, that sounds good to me. Where do I lose? Xander Zayas turned down the title shot. He had agreed to everything else. He told you that in the Kriegel interview. That's how good the interview is. You need to save that interview as this guy goes through his career. So Fundora, after getting turned down by Xander Zayas, then pivoted. Who did he fight? Tim Tszyu in the rematch, who he just beat. Let me point out, in that fight, I was shocked. Tim Tszyu is landing some home run hooks to the side of Fundora's head. I know he was taking punishment, but my goodness, why did Tim Tszyu quit in that fight? I'll try to come back to that fight in a different video, possibly, right? But let's just say, I believe Zayas, who now is a WBO champion and who's calling out Fundora, because he understands that in a division of Ennis, of Ortiz, of Murtazaliev, of Tim Tszyu, of Lubin, of Errol Spence, of Madrimov, of Boachuk. He understands the person the public knows is Sebastian Fundora. Let's enjoy Zayas at 154 because, folks, it might not last. Right? I think he wants a unification. By the way, that's what he still wants. He just got the title. Right? This is the guy on a mission. He wants a unification. Then he's going to have to move up to 160, as I imagine Virgil Ortiz is going to have to. Let's remember, Ortiz had health problems. You can't be weight drained with health problems that took you out of the sport earlier in your career. I believe Zayas eventually is going to get to 160. That's where it gets interesting. Because you have a Marvin Hagler figure at 160. Right, Janabek. Right, this is Marvin Hagler too. He's dominant at middleweight. People don't want to fight him. Right? And somehow the public's overlooking him. You also have Carlos Adames. And understand, Adames is aggressive. Compare and contrast Hamza Shiraz's fight with Adames with Shiraz's fight with Edgar Berlanga at 168. Right? So make no mistake, this guy is dominant to the point where Zayas is dominant to the point where he landed several flush shots. Before the 11th round, Timothy Bradley on the live telecast told you, hey, it looks to me like Perez is ready to go. Right? You thought, you know what, Perez, who was staggered several times in the fight, looked like he was there to be knocked out. But just understand, Zayas is doing what Larry Holmes did against Jerry Cooney. Right? Holmes had a great jab. If he was winning the fight and you couldn't get by the jab, he didn't have to do anything else. In the Jerry Cooney fight, and this is, by the way, how I want Hamza Shiraz to fight, because Shiraz has a great jab. Right? In the Jerry Cooney fight, Jerry Cooney literally just falls to the canvas, really not off a punch. He's that spent. He's that exhausted. He's that beaten. That's who Xander Zayas is. Folks, he knows he's defensively blessed. That's the most important part of his game. Right? This is the defensively blessed freak athlete. This is the guy who is faster handed than you and is a master counterpuncher. Importantly, though, if he hits you with the big counter, and he lands several big counters in this fight, he's not going to follow up because he's firmly convinced that if he just keeps to his blueprint, he's going to continue to win the fight. He's going to move away from you, and there might be a time in this fight where you just fall down. He's not going for the knockout. This isn't closer Terence Crawford. Let me mention this too. Crawford is openly talking about moving back down if he beats Canelo. I don't care what the photos look like. That tells me that Crawford already knows he's not a 168er. That division's too big for him. Right? I think Crawford would have a problem fighting Carlos Adames or Janabek. If he goes down to 154, things get more interesting. There's a possibility that Crawford comes back down to 154 if he beats Canelo. Right? Let me also say, too, I do a lot of research here online. I listen to people talk about boxing. There is a guy, I'm going to mention him. I don't know him. I'm not pubbing a friend here. He's just a guy who gives great analysis. He's a boxer. His name's Lonnie B. Right? Lonnie B. I want people to listen to Lonnie B's take on Canelo Crawford. Right? Well, let me get back to Zayas. Folks, I believe Zayas is going to fight Sebastian Fundora, at least try to. Right? Then he's going to leave the division. I don't believe this guy can linger in the division because the weight cut is too drastic for him. But just understand, this guy is one of the best defensively blessed guys in the sport. Canelo is defensively blessed, but he isn't a freak athlete. This is the freak athlete in his prime at the start of his run. Right? Understand, the guy moves around the ring. He has faster foot speed than everyone at 154. Right? The question is, what happens if he gets pinned up against the ropes by either a body hunter like Lubin, a tall guy throwing down power shots who wants a stoppage? That's who Murtazaliev is. Right? That's who Fundora is. Right? What happens if he gets hit with big shots? What's his punch resistance, given that he's weight drained, particularly in the early rounds when he's vulnerable, rounds 1 and 2, which were rough and tumble here. You thought this was going to be a barn burner 6 or 7 round fight. I was wrong on this fight. I told premium subscribers to take the plus 210, that the fight doesn't go the distance. I also had a plus 400 on the underdog, which I thought was ridiculous. Right, now let me just say, after the first 2 rounds, I didn't see how this fight would make it to the 8th round. But then we got to the algorithm part of the fight. The I've solved your punch pattern part of the fight, where Zayas then is just rotating. Folks, the lateral movement is A+. Right? And he doesn't even dance like Larry Holmes. He just moves around you in the pocket. He's a second or two, he's a step or two faster than most. That's what a freak athlete is. And just understand, he lands several good shots. I know there's a cottage industry here online that believes he can't punch. Folks, he went into the fight with a better than 60% knockout ratio. He hit Perez with some bombs in this fight that literally stood Perez up, right? It's obvious in the 9th round. I'm telling you, there were at least 3 other times where Perez gets hit with shots and is back on his heels. But this guy wants to win the fight more than he wants a stoppage. Right? This is not a closer. This isn't Crawford. This isn't Nigel Benn. Right? So you can be dazed in front of him. This is the guy who stops the combination. Thinks to himself, I've won this exchange. And then moves on to the next one. Let me add this too. They downplay it on the telecast. Just understand that the night that George Kambosos beat Teofimo Lopez in New York City, the guy in his corner was Javier Centeno, the trainer for Zayas. Right? Just understand, Kambosos' trainer, even for his Richardson-Hitchens fight, was Javier. You need to pay close attention to that relationship. Right? This is on par with Dundee Ali, Dundee Leonard, Stewart, Lewis. Right? Zayas has been with Javier for all of his teens. Right? If anything happens to this relationship, anything, right, you need to fade Zayas in that fight. Just understand, Jimmy Ellis, who was trained by Angelo Dundee, famously fought Ali. And to Dundee's surprise, Ali wouldn't pay him his going rate. So for that fight, Dundee was actually in Ellis's corner. Understand, later in Ray Leonard's career, right? Ray Leonard comes back, he fights Marvin Hagler 3 years out of the ring. Who's in his corner? It's Angelo Dundee. Then Ray Leonard fell out with Dundee. Right? Dundee was a guy who wanted his fee. Right? Understand, this is Dundee's living. This is kind of a precursor to what happened to Abel Sanchez and Gennady Golovkin. Right? So, of course, Dundee leaves Leonard's corner, and Leonard started losing fights. Right? The Hector Camacho fight, for example. Right? So you need to look at Zayas and make sure Javier Centeno is in his corner. Might be Centeno, the pronunciation. But you need to make sure that Javier's in his corner. Because understand, this is a blueprint fighter. This is a guy who's in there. He's not reading the lay of the land. Once he figures out the angles in the first 2 rounds, this is the guy who, is in the middle of a combination and stops throwing punches. Imagine combination puncher Andy Ruiz opening up a combination, right, on, let's say, AJ. right? Ruiz opens up a combination and then thinks to himself, I'm only going to throw 2 or 3 shots because it's too dangerous being in the pocket with AJ. Imagine Andy Ruiz then pulling the combination off the table and then circling AJ. That's what Zayas does. Right? So understand, this guy, gifted left uppercut. Sharp counterpuncher. Extremely accurate. Again, 38%. 38% connect rate against a long, rangy opponent here. Understand, 19 more power shots than an opponent who came into ring with a greater than 70% KO ratio. Right? This is the guy who's safety first. He has the athleticism and know-how to pull it off. Right? Expect to see him at 160 within the next 18 months. Let me just say, Boachuk beat Ortiz. That's not the way the judges score it. Who cares? The actual fight is what matters. Boachuk knocked Ortiz down twice. Robert Garcia in Ortiz's corner, in essence, told Ortiz, you need a knockout to win the fight. Nobody wants to own up to it. Boachuk would have a hard time finding this guy in the ring. That's the level of athleticism we're talking about. At one point, his corner says to him, it's like the 10th round or so, in a fight he's dominating. Look at the ESPN telecast. Javier says to him, this guy's only chance is to get inside. So in a fight, he's dominating. You notice that Zayas comes out and he's a few feet away from the guy. Right? He's not going to take any risks. Now, I imagine Bomac's advice would have been different to Terrence Crawford. Bomac would have just said, hey, he's ready. Right? If you have the opportunity, close the show. Right? That's not this corner. This is an elite talent. I believe he is hoping to rule the roost. He's a better athlete than 95% of the sport. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.